Today's talk is on the significance and science of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And we're going to start looking at the history. Kind of quickly, we'll go through the history, the Aztec Empire and the Spanish conquest back in the 1500s, Juan Diego and the Marian apparitions. Tony will talk about all this. And then we're going to focus more on the tilma, the cloak that Juan Diego was wearing at the time that these apparitions occurred, and the stunning symbology that was available in this image. And the Aztecs could really relate to a lot of the symbols on the tilma, and the Spanish as well, resulted in amazing conversions. And then we're going to talk about the physical properties of the tilma and how it's survived. It's miraculous that it's even survived at all, much less nearly 500 years. And it has survived acid spills and bomb attack. We'll talk about all that. And then we're going to look at some of the scientific studies of the tilma, in particular how this image, they have no idea, it's inexplicable, this image of Mary that appeared on his cloak. We'll hear more about that. And then the eyes, in the eyes of Mary, they have found some very interesting things, which we'll talk about. So Tony's going to lead us off, and then I'll talk briefly about the Basilica in Mexico City.
There is so much to talk about the Virgen de Guadalupe that we're trying to cover a lot of things today in 1 hour, but cope with me. First, we're going to talk about the history. As when we read the Bible, the sacred scripture, we need to know, to understand the history, what happened during the time of the event. The same happened here. The Aztec Empire was the biggest empire existing there. Was very powerful, completely, dominating that region when the Spanish conquest came in 1519. They lived completely with the fear of God, the sacrifice. It was a culture where they have to sacrifice a person almost every day in order to satisfy the gods. The culture was completely different to what the Christianity were bringing the Spanish people. They sacrificed as many as 250,000 people per year. And in 1521, let's keep with the track of the time here, the conjunction of Venus and Sun, some Aztec thought that it was mark of an era, the end of an era. They believe in cycles, the sun, the moon, and all that. With the help of non-Aztec tribes, like happened in every time, they have tribes that didn't like the Aztecs. The Spanish people joined forces with them, and they attacked in 1521 the Aztecs. But what happened, the Spanish people brought a lot of diseases from the other part of the world, and they started imposing the Spanish rule. They destroyed the temples that the Aztecs had. They tried to push Christianity to a culture that was completely different. And we're going to have a short video who talk about that.
In the 15th century, the Aztec Empire in modern-day Mexico was a blood-soaked empire. They sacrificed their children, their wives, orphans, widows, and strangers, and any slave they could find. This was the world that the Spaniards came to in the 1520s. And they tried to bring the message of Christianity, but to little effect. People weren't converting because these two cultures were an infinity apart. And it was to this very culture that the Virgin of Guadalupe came. Not with fire and brimstone, not with anger and justice, but with mercy, with a message of repentance and of love. And she revealed herself as the mother of all peoples, uniting them in her. And she taught us that we have one common Father, who is God who is in heaven.
That gives you an idea. She came to join two cultures. Some problems that after the Spanish conquest in the 1520s, created great tension between the Aztec and the Spanish people. Of course, new customs, new religion, new everything. Franciscan missionary, I'm a Franciscan, made little headway and conflict loomed. They tried to push Christianity. They went too fast, too soon. And that created a lot of conflict. The majority of the Spanish colonies were single men, young single men. and who marry or make concubines of native women. These unions resulted in mixed race individuals called the mestizos, and eventually became the majority of the Spanish population. Both races mixed for years and became the largest population in Mexico. The Spanish people start abusing. They start taking the Indians, the native, to do all the heavy labor, and there were horrible incidents of abuse against the native people. That started creating a conflict. The Spanish also had some problems, and the search for gold, the Aztec has a lot of gold, and they thought the gold was growing like plants. And the Spanish came and saw all that gold, and of course, they start fighting to see who had more golds than anybody else. And they start creating problems among themselves. In the middle of this, Bishop Juan de Zumárraga was named the first bishop there, and they tried to defend the Indians of the abuses that the Spanish, his Spanish people were doing. What happened is the Spanish people started rebelling against the bishop. They tried to kill him, and he excommunicated the council. He withdrew all the priests from Mexico City, and that was a mess. And he wrote a letter to Emperor Charles V in 1530 saying, if God does not provide a solution for his own hand, this land is about to be completely lost. That's how bad the situation was. In the middle of this, there was a little Indian, a very humble Indian called Juan Diego, that he has to travel from where he used to live to Mexico City, crossing El Monte de Tepeyac. And in December 9, 1531, the Virgin Mary appeared to him, to this humble farmer, Juan Diego, on the Tepeyac Hill. He has to cross that hill every time. He was one of the first converted, and he has to go from his house to Mexico City, where is Mexico City now, in order to learn religious education. He and his wife were among the first natives to convert and be baptized after the arrival of Franciscan missionary in what is called the New Spain in 1524. Tepeyac Hill was a former site, and these are things that will explain why the Virgin of Guadalupe appeared there. Was the site of a shrine dedicated to one of the Aztec goddess, Tonatzin. That means our sacred mother. Coincidence? Mary appeared to Juan Diego dressed as an Aztec princess, and we're going to see that more on detail, but looking like a mestiza with that brownish skin. That is a woman of mixed Aztec and Spanish descent. That means the symbols start appearing here. Mary addressed Juan in his native language, the Nahuatl, saying that she wanted a church built on that spot. And these are the words: I desire a church in this place where people may experience my compassion. All those who sincerely ask for my help in their work and in their sorrows will know their mother is near. Can you imagine Juan Diego listening to that and say, who is this? Why she's telling me this? Juan went back to the bishop, Zumárraga, with a merry request that a church be built in the hill of Tepeyac. Of course, the bishop had all these issues from the Spanish, all these issues with the Aztec, and they believe him. Who is this guy here? And after two times that Juan Diego went to see the bishop, finally the bishop said, give me a sign, bring something from this lady. Bring me something that I can believe you. On December 12th, Our Lady appeared to Juan again. Actually, the lady appeared 5 times, 4 to Juan and 1 to the uncle of Juan, that he was sick. She asked him to pick a Castilian roses. It is December, it's a hill, Castilian roses doesn't grow on Mexico in that hill. And she told him, go to the hill and bring me some Castilian roses. They are beautiful roses, big roses. These flowers are not native to Mexico, but Juan Diego went and bonded the flower in his tilma. The tilma is like a cloak, and we're going to talk more about that tilma. Juan took the roses to the bishop. It's a third time or fourth time. When he opened his tilma, the flowers tumbled out to the floor, but the fabric was completely covered with the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. I can imagine the face of the bishop. There's a video who explains that.
10 years after the conquest of the Aztec capital, later known as Mexico City, at dawn on December the 9th, 1531, the Amerindian Juan Diego was traveling to Tlatelolco. As he traveled across Mount Tepeyac, he was attracted by the harmonious song of birds from the peak where the sun was rising. He moved towards the peak of the hill. He heard a voice quietly calling him and saw a girl standing in a bright light. She spoke to him in the cultured language of the Aztecs.
I'm the Virgin Mary, the mother of the true God for whom all live, the creator of men, Lord of the heavens and the earth. Go to the bishop, tell him that I want a little house here in the glade, to honor him who is love, tenderness, compassion, good, peace, truth, justice. Juan Diego raced to the bishop, but obviously it was not easy for him to obtain an audience. Finally, he was received, but the bishop did not believe him and said, I will listen to you later, when I have time.
So, Juan Diego, disappointed, returned to the mountain. That same day, he climbed Mount Tepeyac once again, and once again met Mary. Juan Diego humbly asked whether it would be better to send someone more important than himself. But Mary answered,
Tomorrow, return to the bishop and tell him that I want my little sacred house. The next day, Sunday afternoon, Juan Diego returned to the bishop, who did not believe him, and said, Bring me proof, a sign, so that I can believe that it is truly the Lady of Heaven who sends you.
Once on the peak of Mount Tepeyac, Juan Diego met Mary once again. When she heard from the poor man that the bishop wanted proof, Mary asked Juan Diego to return the next morning, when she would give him a sign to show to Zumárraga. However, Juan Diego did not return the next day. In fact, he had to go and look for a priest, fearing for his uncle, who was seriously ill. He had promised himself that he would see the lady the following day, but to his great surprise, she met him anyway.
What concerns you? What are you worried about? What is happening?
After listening to Juan Diego's explanation, Mary said,
Don't worry. Your uncle has already recovered. Am I, your mother, not here? Now listen. Go to the place where we first met, where we have met before. There you will find some flowers. Pick them and bring them to me. Juan Diego immediately went to fetch the flowers, wrapped them in his cloak, and took them to the lady, who, when she saw them, touched them and arranged them and said, Go to the bishop and give these flowers only to him, and say this is the sign that the Lady of Heaven has sent to him.
It was late on the morning of December the 12th when Juan Diego ran back to the bishop to take him those wonderful Castilian roses, which had never grown on Mount Tepeyac, especially in midwinter. When he stood before the bishop, Juan Diego told him of his conversation with Mary and opened his cloak to show the flowers. At that very instant, on the poor material of the cloak, an image of Mary appeared. The bishop and all those present fell to their knees before the miracle. Juan Diego, having fulfilled his task, returned to the uncle he had left the day before. His uncle told him that the Virgin had appeared at his bedside, introducing herself with the name Guadalupe. The story of Juan Diego and the Virgin of Guadalupe soon spread by word of mouth, as in the Aztec tradition.
Now, there are various historical sources. The oldest one is 1548, just a few years after this happened, and it's illustrated in what is called the Codex Escalada. It was illustrated because they didn't know how to write, the Aztecs, and as you can see with the red arrow, it shows Juan Diego, and with the green arrow, it shows an image of Our Lady. There is another source called the Nican Mopoua. That means here it is told, written in 1553 or 1554, just a few years after that, about 40 years after that, by an Indian scholar and colonial official, Antonio Valeriano. Was written based on personal conversations with Juan Diego. And another important source is the Nican Motecpana, written between 1590 and 1600 by an eminent Mexican historian, Fernando de Alva Cortés. Somebody care to pronounce? Is his social. Here is a video about the.
There are numerous written sources and local writings that mention this event. It has therefore been possible to verify that the people in this story truly existed. Amongst the local sources closest to the time of the events, there is one that is considered a masterpiece. Its name means, "Here it is told."
It is the faithful and historical document of the apparitions of Our Lady, written just 20 years after the apparitions of Our Lady. It is beautiful from the historical, poetic and literary point of view.
El documento más importante, el Nican Mopoua.
The most important document is the Nican Mopoua. Undoubtedly, it is one of the most important and ancient. The oldest copy, which is held in the New York Public Archives, was written by Antonio Valeriano, an educated Amerindian who studied both Spanish and Latin with the Franciscans, so that he wrote with Latin characters, but with Nahuatl sounds.
This and other sources, such as the Code 1548, also known as the Codex Escalada, dating from the year of Juan Diego's death, have been carefully analyzed by the Church. In 1990, Pope John Paul II beatified the Amerindian. Saint Juan Diego thus became the first lay Amerindian to be canonized in the history of Christianity.
Now that they mentioned St. John Paul II, he loved the Guadalupe. He went 5 times to Mexico, and the first trip international by St. John Paul II was to Mexico, to the Basilica. Some Aztec symbols on the tilma. Now we're going to mention what are the symbols, what are the messages that those symbols tell us. The woman wears no mask. That means she is human. All the idols, all the gods that the Aztec used to follow, they have some kind of mask on. She's not a goddess, she's a human person. The hair is loose and with a partition, and kind of loose. That means she's a virgin. Those are real symbols. That she wears a bluish green mantle. Probably it's hard to see there, but when you see, that means that color is reserved for kings and queens. She is a queen. She wears a pink tunic. That is the color of the rising sun. That is the sign of the renewal of life. Remember, the Aztec believe in the sun cycles. She has a black veil, a sash, with a bow in her waist, meaning that she is pregnant, and we know who she is carrying. More symbols. Her hands are folded in prayer, meaning that there is somebody else more powerful than herself. She has a quincus flower that is like a four-leaf flower over her womb. That is a symbol of perfection and transcendence, of man meeting God. Those are symbols that the Aztecs will recognize. The knee is bent, meaning that she's like some kind of dancing, a form of prayer to the Aztec. The Aztec used to pray and dance. And more important, as important, she's portrayed as a mestizo, a mixed race. That means she's there in the middle of a conflict, trying to bring the message of peace and the message of truth to both sides. She has come for all, even the outcast. Now, the Spanish would recognize some symbols too. She's clothed with the sun and the moon under the feet, and we would probably remember that is the woman in Revelation 12:1. She has a gold brooch, a pin on her neck with a cross. That is the symbol of Christianity. Again, the hands are united in prayer as is common to the Christian, shows honor and worship to God. The left hand is darker and the right hand is lighter, signifying the two races, the Spanish and the Aztecs. There is a symbol that explains, there are videos explaining more of those symbols.
Hidden on the tilma are two codexes. They're like puzzles. One which was clearly intelligible to the Aztec people of the time, and another which was clearly intelligible to the Spanish Christians of the time. But they both exist in perfect harmony in this one image. Mary came to unite these two peoples who were at war with each other. And she united them not with the conquest of war, but with the conquest of love. I will quickly take you through some of the symbolism that both groups would have immediately recognized. First, and maybe most significantly, Mary appeared as what was called a mestiza, a mixed child of Spanish and Aztec parents. Mestizos were the lowest class of people at the time. They were considered untouchables, and they were scorned by all. Yet this is exactly how the Mother of God chose to appear. Our Lord said in Scripture, "What you do to the least of mine, you have done to me." Mary appeared as the least of the children of God, so that she could unite and share the true message of the gospel, that we are all called by the same Father in heaven to be His children and to live as one family, united in love. Let's look at the color of Our Lady's mantle. She has a blue-green tone, which for the Aztec culture was reserved only for royalty. So when the Aztecs saw that, they knew that this woman was of royal descent. But for the Christian, they saw the blue as the star of the sea, as the woman who, for so many centuries, had comforted Christians with her maternal and loving gaze.
The Amerindians understood all this because it was part of their life, their culture. They understood perfectly that not only was that figure noble, but also that she was an empress, because only the emperor, Moctezuma, could use the azure cloak, which meant the sky dotted with emeralds. That is, it became a turquoise color.
The ermine lining symbolized Mary's royalty and purity. The black cincture that she's wearing indicates to the Aztecs that she is pregnant. And also the way that her hair was parted was a direct sign to the Aztecs that she was a virgin.
That she was a virgin, like a maiden, because of the loose hair combed down, which meant virginity. So the Amerindians saw in the hair virginity, and in the belt maternity.
There's also a 4-petaled jasmine flower called the quincux flower, which is in the shape of a cross over her womb. This is what the Aztecs called the solar flower, and it was an Aztec symbol for divinity and the center of the cosmic order. The significance of this is stunning, that right over her womb, she was showing to the Aztec people that the center of the cosmos was here. Our Lady is also adorned with other 4-petaled flowers with leaves that symbolized the 5th age for the Aztecs. And the 5th age was supposed to be the age of peace. So by Our Lady being clothed with these flowers, she was telling the Aztec people that the new era of peace had begun. The magnolia heart flower symbolized the human hearts that the Aztecs had sacrificed to their gods. And yet Our Lady came for new kinds of hearts, to turn our stony hearts into living hearts, from earthly corruption into divine immortality. Our Lady's hands are in a posture where she's pointing to the cross on her brooch. And the brooch was a clear sign to the Spaniards and the Spanish missionaries, a cross that showed that they were Christians and followers of our Lord. You see that Mary is at prayer. Why? Because there is one who is greater than her. And so she's revealing herself in a spirit and in a posture of submission and humility, which showed both the Aztecs and the Christians that there is one greater than her. Our Lady revealed herself as the Virgin of Guadalupe, which was a native word in Aztec that meant the one who crushes the serpent. But to the Spaniards, they heard it and understood it as the place where she had once appeared and a shrine had been built in her honor in Spain. Maybe the most striking part of this image of Guadalupe are the eyes of Our Lady, because they're eyes that are universally understood by any people across any time. These are eyes of mercy. These are eyes of compassion and of love and of forgiveness. These are not the eyes of a woman who has come to destroy the world for their sins. These are the eyes of a woman in whom there is nothing harsh, there is nothing fierce, and there's nothing frightening. She came to reveal herself to Juan Diego as a refuge for all sinners through all generations. And this is clearly understood by anyone who looks upon her image.
So, who can have painted this image, which represents a perfect synthesis between the Christian iconography and the Mesoamerican culture? Who, just 10 years after the conquest of Mexico, could have such a profound understanding of the two worlds? Moreover, who could have translated this knowledge into a masterpiece of harmony, such as the image of Guadalupe?
So that's pretty amazing, isn't it? The symbology that was all part of that, and how she's showing a totally different view, understanding of God than what the Aztecs had before. And so Mary's message to St. Juan Diego and to all of us, she told him, and she's telling us today, let not your heart be disturbed. Am I not here for you? I who have the honor to be your mother. Are you not under my shadow and protection? Are you not happily within the fold of my mantle and the crossing of my arms? And what else do you wish? Do not let anything worry or disturb you. So this was a very welcome message to the Aztecs, who were, having a really hard time at the time, as well as the Spanish. And there were amazing conversions. 9 million natives converted in just 8 years. Whole villages traveled to the missions, the Franciscan missions, to be baptized, many with no previous evangelization. Polygamy gave way to Catholic marriage. People would walk for miles to go to confession. The lower class, that mixed race, the mezquitos, were recognized as children of God and were treated more equally. And it's interesting to note that this occurred at a time when 5 million European Catholics abandoned the faith, the Catholic faith, due to the Protestant Reformation. So Mary brought in almost double the number that was lost in the Protestant Reformation. So now we're going to look at the tilma a little bit more carefully, the physical properties of the tilma. It's made of cactus, agave fibers, and it's lasted nearly 500 years. And this fiber, the cloth weaved with this fiber, normally decompose in less than 15 years, but this fabric shows no signs of deterioration. Interestingly, it has an intact seam down the middle of the fabric, and it survived its first 120 years with no protection from the elements, and then another 370 years behind glass, and only recently behind bulletproof glass. So that first 120 years, people were touching it, praying to it, holding rosaries to it, candles, candle wax, and all this, and it's still here today. Had no protection. And then in 1784, there was a silversmith who accidentally spilled nitric acid on the tilma while trying to clean the silver frame. And it, of course, survived that. That should have destroyed it as well. And then in November of 1921, there was a bomb attack. A terrorist, anarchist, placed a dynamite bomb, 20-some sticks. It exploded at the foot of the altar there at the basilica, right in front of the image. The Marlborough altar was shattered, and the 75-pound bronze crucifix and candelabras were bent. You can see how that crucifix is bent. This was taken by a friend of mine who went to Mexico City, and he was telling me about it. And the church windows and the windows of buildings over 50 yards away were shattered, but the tilma was not damaged, and the glass was not even scratched. Again, it was not bulletproof glass at the time. And so this video is going to talk about the amazing survival of the tilma, which is also called an ayate.
Juan Diego's tilma, on which the image of the Morenita appeared, was a poor cloak, also known as an ayate, used by the poorest Amerindians.
They were very long woven cloths that the Amerindians wrapped themselves in. At times they slept on the ground and covered themselves in the cloth, or they used them to carry goods. They wrapped the things they bought at the market in them. They were rough cloths with many uses.
This cloth was woven on a belt loom about 50 to 55 centimeters wide. San Diego's ayate was formed of 3 pieces, and the image formed on 2 pieces. So we can see the joint between the 2 cloths and the seam that runs vertically through the image.
In 1946, the Institute of Biology at the Autonomous National University of Mexico studied the cloak, confirming that it was made from agave fibers.
The ayate was certainly not the typical canvas used for paintings.
Miguel Cabrera, uno de los grandes pintores del siglo XVIII, dice que era...
Miguel Cabrera, an 18th century artist, stated that it was absurd to think that an artist would have used such a rough canvas made up of 2 pieces.
When various canvases were joined for a painting, the seam was hidden. It was unthinkable that the painter should leave a visible seam.
So, how could an agave canvas, which is very fragile, be preserved for such a long time?
It is necessary to treat it continually, to fight the parasites that attack it. That is to say, for example, unlike a linen cloth, which is very durable, agave fibers only last for a very short time. This topic has been a surprise for many investigators, since the fabric has been conserved for more than 475 years. Unlike other fabrics made of material very similar to that of the ayate, which have not lasted for more than 10 years. The original image remained almost 120 years without the protection of glass. It is therefore a surprise that this fabric, so fragile, should have been preserved. Special measures to protect it have only been taken in recent years. Recently, studies have been carried out that show that the fabric is still not decaying.
Moreover, it must be said that the tilma has survived an incident in which nitric acid was poured onto the fabric, an event that caused the appearance of a spot, which is inexplicably disappearing.
The silversmith slipped momentarily and landed on the Virgin's face. He fell on his right hand and spilt some acid, and he knew perfectly well it could have destroyed the painting immediately. In fact, he ended up in the hospital, but nothing happened to the image.
There is more. A bomb that exploded in 1921 during an attack destroyed everything, even bending a massive bronze crucifix, while the image was the only thing that remained intact.
In 1921, a communist terrorist placed a bouquet of flowers at the foot of the altar where the tilma was being housed. Inside the flowers were over 20 sticks of dynamite, which exploded and destroyed the marble altar, the communion rail, and shattered the church windows, and even shattered the windows of neighboring buildings. But the image, which was framed behind a single glass pane, remained completely untouched. Under the image was a large brass crucifix, which was bent completely backwards by the explosion. Our Lord allowed himself to be bent by the force of the explosion, protecting the image of his mother. The image and the glass case of the tilma were perfectly intact, and no one in the church was hurt.
The explosion of the 14th of November 1921 destroyed many objects on the altar, smashing the altar marble. It bent the crucifix, which we keep here as a witness to the event. Candlesticks, too. The image was not protected by bulletproof glass, yet it stayed intact, and it's remained so down the centuries, despite people touching it, handling it, kissing it, placing their rosaries on it, despite holy water, candle wax, air pollution, and so forth. Our Lady of Guadalupe has been with us here for nearly 500 years.
So not only is the appearance of this image a miracle, but the whole survival of all this for almost 500 years. So we're going to look a little bit more at the image on the tilma. As was mentioned, there was no preparation of the fabric, no priming or sizing, no sketches. Most times an artist will sketch out what they plan to paint with a pencil beforehand. They found no evidence of any of that. In the 1930s, Nobel Prize-winning biochemist Professor Richard Kuhn analyzed some samples of the fabric, and he found no natural or synthetic pigment nor any trace of any dye. He stated that the colors on the tilma are not painted, but the fibers are somehow colored by an unknown means. And then in 1946, this doctor examined the tilma under a microscope, and he also found no evidence of brush strokes. A very important study was done in 1979 by Dr. Philip Callahan of the University of Florida. He performed infrared studies. He took infrared photographs of the tilma. At night, they took it out of the case, and he was allowed to take these infrared photographs. He found that there were some added painted highlights and gold leaf that had cracked and deteriorated. These were added later. But the original image, including the rose robe, the blue mantle, the hands, and the face, were not cracked or faded, and it was an unknown pigment. He said the color was inexplicable. He had no idea what made that color. And he also found that the face turns an olive color from a distance, not from the pigment being different, but from diffraction or bending of light, which is impossible for an artist to do. And so this video is going to talk about the image on the tilma.
The way in which the image is fixed onto the fabric is still a mystery.
In the tilma, there is no what we call imprimatur, which is the preparation that painters have to carry out to eliminate the irregularities in the fabric. In the case of the tilma, already in 1666 there was proof that this preparation did not exist. The weave of the tilma is so open that you can see through it.
In painting, to create the sense of volume and depth, layers of color are used, various brushstrokes of different hues.
In the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, the Ayate seems to have the volume created from a single brushstroke, a single layer of color. What is more, there is a very surprising fact. It is a very rough canvas, because we can see knots and areas with thick weave. In the lips of the Virgin, it is precisely the thick weave that gives this impression of volume. That is, the imperfections in the fabric have been used to create this face.
In the 1980s, with infrared photography, a technique that is still used, for example, in the critical studies of ancient paintings, Professors Jody Smith and Philip Callahan confirmed that the tilma had not been prepared for painting. They also said that there was a total absence of brushstrokes.
Dr. Callahan concluded, following his studies, that it was not possible to determine the type of pigment. In fact, he was surprised that the pigment had been preserved for such a long time. He was also surprised by the fact that the tilma did not show any damage, caused by the smoke and the light of the candles that were used.
Callahan's discovery confirmed the results of previous chemical analysis of the tilma.
In the 20th century, a Nobel Prize winner for chemistry, Dr. Richard Kuhn, examined fibers from the tilma, trying to discover the origin of the colors. He concluded that the pigments, which he thought was paint, was made of no known animal, mineral, or synthetic chemical. And still to this day, it is inconclusive of what those colors are actually made from.
You have the survival of this tilma over all these years, and then the image, it's all inexplicable. And the last thing we're going to talk about is a more recent discovery of people. They found images of people in the pupils, in the eyes, Mary's eyes on the tilma. In 1929 and 1951, photographers viewing enlarged photographs noticed what appeared to be the upper part of a bearded man in Mary's right eye. You can see the red outline of that. And in 1956, people were skeptical of this, of course. A group of well-known Mexican ophthalmologists, eye doctors, were invited to examine the image, including this doctor, a renowned skeptic. And they wanted to see, is this really true? And it was really a bearded man, and they saw the face of a bearded man in both eyes through magnifying glass. And in 1958, the image was examined by another ophthalmologist using ophthalmoscopes, and he saw multiple people in both eyes. And he said that the distortion in the image in looking into the eyes is identical to what we see as looking into a normal eye, an eye doctor would see. The curvature of the cornea, he saw that sort of thing. And this was confirmed by other ophthalmologists in the 1960s and 70s. Many of them were skeptics. And then in 1979, a Peruvian scientist and engineer, Dr. Jose Tossman, studied the tilma using sophisticated digital imaging equipment. This is scanning equipment we scan today. And he scanned her eyes and enlarged them more than 2,000 times. He found other human figures reflected in her eyes, including the image of the bishop, and he thought that this appears to be what Our Lady of Guadalupe saw looking through this image when Juan Diego presented his tilma to the bishop in 1531. He also noted, and this is very important, that these images appear in both eyes and in stereoscopic vision. And he also, you'll hear a video, he's going to talk about how they morph together. And so this, to think this is just made up is, imagination is not really pertinent because of this, the way it is handled here. And that's discussed in this video.
How this simple piece of cloth has survived since 1531 remains a mystery, but new discoveries continue to reveal incredible surprises. It all began in 1950 when a Mexican artist claimed he'd discovered the image of a human head reflected in the pupil of Our Lady's eye. No one took him seriously, at least until a group of 15 eye specialists examined the image using powerful magnifying glasses. What they discovered defies all rational explanation. Using the scientific instruments available, they confirmed that the characteristics of the pupils correspond to those of a human being. They're not just blotches. In 1979, Dr. Aste, a US-trained computer scanning expert specialized in satellite imagery, applied state-of-the-art technology in an attempt to solve the enigma. His findings confirm the original conclusions of the eye specialists and go way beyond expectations.
The images were enlarged 2,000 times to obtain very specific details. The first figure that I found and that attracted my attention was that of a native man, sitting with his legs crossed as the Mexicans used to do at the time. It is very detailed. The seated native wears a ring in his ear. The thickness is as fine as a hair.
The professor also identified what is said to be the figure of the bishop, and which corresponds perfectly to paintings from the period in which Juan de Zumárraga is portrayed. Then there is the figure of Juan Diego with a tilma around his neck.
Then I found something that really attracted my attention. It was a black woman, who I later found out actually existed in history. Then, near what was supposed to be the bishop, I saw a white man. I later came to know that he could have been an interpreter. We know that Zumárraga needed an interpreter. When he spoke to the natives, we know his name. He was called Juan González.
The last figures discovered by Tonsman belong to a family group. Mother, father, 2 children, and another pair of adults, where the woman is carrying a child on her back. Altogether, there are 13 human figures to be seen in the eyes of Guadalupe.
This investigation into the eyes of Our Lady of Guadalupe revealed something truly extraordinary. The eyes of the Virgin reflect the profiles of 13 people. 12 of them can be seen in both eyes, like in a photograph, when an ordinary person is looking at something.
The computer was a great help in this sense. One of the most important tests was to see if the images appeared in both eyes. In fact, all the images appear in both eyes in the same positions. Not only, if you continuously switch from one eye to the other, using a transition technique called morphing, you see that they match up perfectly.
How do we explain this mystery? Dr. Aste believes that the images in the eyes of Our Lady are the reflection of everything that was in the room where the miracle of the roses took place, just like a photograph. According to the tradition, Juan Diego showed the image to the bishop, Juan de Zumárraga, to prove the appearance of the Virgin. Skeptics might say that all it takes is a bit of imagination in order to interpret a group of spots as human figures. The director of the Superior Institute of Guadalupan Studies disagrees.
Some people think that these dark, shiny images in the eyes are the fruit of our imagination. I disagree. These reflections are present in both eyes. That's what is most important, and that's what makes all this so credible.
The latest technologies have revealed something else reflected in Our Lady's eyes, a family. In each of her eyes we can identify the distinct reflection of a family group, in which the figure of a mother is always present at the center of the pupils, as though highlighting the central role of mothers in our society and for each member of the family. But there are other figures reflected in the family nucleus besides the parents and children. Two other people stand in the background. Dr. Aste has identified them as the grandparents. An explicit message not to forget the elderly. After more than 30 years of gazing into the eyes of Our Lady of Guadalupe, Dr. Aste sums up his discoveries in the following conclusion.
I believe the message of the family is particularly relevant. We have discovered these hidden images right at the time when the family is under attack.
The hill of Tepeyac, where Our Lady appeared in 1531, has always promoted a message of peace and mercy. Now it communicates a new message. It's time, her eyes tell us, to strengthen and defend the Christian family.
So we see how modern science is actually reinforcing our belief in Mary and what we see in the tilma. So these images of the people in the eyes of the tilma also manifest what's called the typical reflection effect of Samson Pergici. I don't know about this, but if you're an ophthalmologist, you might know. And this, of course, was completely unknown at the time of the image's formation. And as I mentioned, the images in the eyes follow the curvature of the cornea precisely in the same way as in a normal human eye. So in conclusion, we've talked about these scientifically studied attributes, the material of the tilma and its surprising lack of decay, that the original image on the tilma was inexplicable. They don't know how the colors got there. They're not painted. And then we talked about these images of people in Mary's eyes on the tilma. So we want to mention about the basilica briefly. This is in Mexico City. There are three main buildings in this picture. The old basilica is in the middle there, and then to the right of it is a Franciscan Capuchin convent. And then there's a new basilica that was built in the 1970s, much larger, a basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And there are over 20 million people that visit this site every year. Pilgrims come here, and 10 million of them come each December. And so that's December 12th, of course, is the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And you can see this is the image behind the altar, and that's a close-up inside the frame there at the Basilica in Mexico City. So we'd also like to say, why do Catholics pray to Mary? Well, of course, the Church has always honored, not worshipped Mary. This is important for non-Catholics to understand. And she was declared the Mother of God at a council in Ephesus, Turkey in 431 AD. So Mary is a special grace to humanity and draws us to her Son Jesus. And as at the wedding feast at CAINA, Mother Mary intercedes to Jesus on our behalf. And the Catechism has this to say: because she gives us Jesus her Son, Mary is Mother of God and our Mother. We can entrust all our cares and petitions to her. She prays for us as she prayed for herself. Let it be to me according to your word. By entrusting ourselves to her prayer, we abandon ourselves to the will of God. Together with her, thy will be done. And so it's a beautiful gift that we've been given in Mary. So in summary, we talked about the history, the Aztec Empire, and the Spanish conquest of the Marian apparitions to Juan Diego, and the astounding tilma, the Aztec and Spanish symbols that really spoke to the people at the time, especially the Aztecs, and offered them a lot of hope and resulted in amazing conversions. We talked about the physical properties of the tilma, how it has survived 500 years. It shouldn't be here. The tilma, the fabric itself, should be long gone. How it survived an acid spill and a bomb attack. And then we talked about these studies of the tilma, the image. They don't have any idea how this color is on there, and the images of the people that the eye doctors, ophthalmologists, and all found in her eyes, and looked a little bit at the Basilica of Guadalupe. So in closing, we have one final short video.
The image of Our Lady of Guadalupe challenges us to transcend the limits of our understanding. It is a tangible sign of Mary's love for the Mexican people and for all of us. Through this extraordinary image, she invites us to recognize the presence of God in our lives and to trust in His guidance. We can contemplate the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe with humility and wonder, acknowledging that what we see goes beyond what science can explain. May the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe accompany us on our journey of faith and inspire us to embrace God's love and mercy.
Our website, the Catholic Apologetics Institute of North America, cainaweb.org. This presentation is there if you want to review some of the slides. It's there as PDF. Some of the videos we've taken these clips from are there as well. This book is where a lot of this material came from, Guadalupe Mysteries, Deciphering the Code. As I mentioned earlier, I've had 3 books published. The first one, The Reality of God, The Layman's Guide to Scientific Evidence for the Creator, goes through the rest of the story on how science actually supports belief in God, contrary to the prevailing opinion out there that science has somehow disproven God's existence. So this makes a great gift, especially here at Christmas, for people, especially young people, college students, who are challenged in their faith by science. My next book, Search No More, The Keys to Truth and Happiness, makes the case that the truth and happiness we're all looking for in life are found in Jesus and the Catholic Church. And so this book makes a great gift for people, have you ever heard this before, who are spiritual but not religious? So this somebody believes in God but doesn't go to church. This would draw them in. And my newest book, Catholic Stories of Faith and Hope, How God Brings Good Out of Suffering, looks at that big question, why would a loving God allow evil, pain, and suffering? Catholic teaching on that, and also contains some testimonies of people I know who have dealt with some significant suffering and the good that God has brought out of that.